Commissioner Freeland, if you have the time to join us on the panel, we'll open to discussion with the audience. I realize there's a seat up here for you, and I realize we may have roped you into more time than you planned to spend, but, and so at this point, I would like to give people in the audience an opportunity to make a comment or ask a question. We have people with wireless microphones, so I would just ask that you wait until they get to you and that you identify yourself before you make your comments and questions, and leave some time for others to follow you. So I saw a couple hands over here. Phil, and then we'll come to the front.
Phil Basie, retired Boston educator. My question is the Accuplacer a good test? Does it really measure the things that are needed for college readiness, or should there be a better test? I was intrigued by the fact that there's not a whole lot of correlation between the MCAS and Accuplacer.
That seems like a good question for the commissioner to handle. Sorry. Glad you're here.
Let me start with it, but let me also invite colleagues who work with it on a day-to-day basis, and Andrea as well. And now, is Andrea still there? I guess Andrea has had
You're on your own.
Had to leave. But my colleague from Framingham, I think, may have. The Accuplacer was carefully selected after a very thoughtful process and examination of alternative tests. I have heard very mixed things about it from faculty members working with it. One of the things that is commonly said about the Accuplacer, although I think the test makers have begun to correct this, is that it's not a good diagnostic instrument. It's a good placement instrument, but not a good diagnostic instrument, and that's a limitation of it, although I think a diagnostic version of Accuplacer is now available. But many faculty and academic administrators that I work with continue to think it does a reasonably good job of at least placing students into an appropriate level of work. But I have heard other faculty members say that they find it much too narrow and much too limiting, and so I think it's an open question of whether or not going forward that's the best possible instrument.
We, as I said before, use Accuplacer, and we just spent the first year writing committee spent the last year looking at Accuplacer, looking at comparing Accuplacer placement and student scores, also looking at comparing it to SAT, because the new SAT that has an essay test, because the complaint was that it wasn't, that it was too broad, that the people that were getting placed in the intro, there was too many of them probably should have been placed in there, that there were students that were placed into expository writing that probably should have been placed into intro. You look at some of the random samplings of essays and you're sort of horrified that this person got placed into expository writing when they should have been placed somewhere else. And there really wasn't a lot of correlation between sort of success. And what was interesting that when we looked at scores, SAT scores, Accuplacer placement, grades in Introduction to College Writing, and grades in Expository Writing, which is our freshman level class, and then grades in the freshman level history class. The only grades that were correlated were the grades between the Introduction to College Writing and the freshman writing class and the history class, not with SAT scores, not with the Accuplacer scores.
If we could get a microphone here. Actually, I think the people with the microphones are deciding who's going to ask the questions.
My voice is fairly loud anyway.
Well, you know what? Somebody in the back has a microphone, so we'll just go to her and then to you. Thank you.
Good morning. My name is Sarah Garrett, and I'm the Vice President for Academic Affairs at Bristol Community College. And I would like to follow up on that last question about the Accuplacer. I have been in 3 systems, in Maryland, in Connecticut, and here, of course, in Massachusetts. And I must say that I have compared the Accuplacer with other diagnostics and agree with some of the comments that have been made. It is an excellent placement instrument. And in terms of being able to place students into the appropriate classes for college readiness. One of the main issues, however, in terms of placing students in college-ready classes, and the panelists have, the professor from Framingham actually really sized it up, is the expectations of us in higher ed and the disconnect between the expectations of the students when they come in. We do a lot of talk about the alignment of curriculum. And Commissioner, you were at Bristol and we spoke about dual enrollment and the great benefits of dual enrollment and the successes that we've had with our regional high schools with dual enrollment. The more that we can exercise that initiative, the better, because we're partnering with our high schools and aligning the curriculum. And the more that we can work together in partnership and work on looking at the curriculum and the expectations that we have in higher ed, the better for our students. You know, our professors in mathematics are looking at modular teaching so that students are able to progress at their own levels. Professor Solomon, you spoke about that. And we're having terrific successes with that. But if we do that, we move it from our colleges into the high schools, where it can happen when students are in the 10th and the 11th grades, so that by the time they get to us, they don't spend that time in those classes, all the better. And what's happening is that the students that are taking those classes with us in dual enrollment are completing those classes before they get to us. And so their time and the effort is being spent where it should be spent, in the high schools.
Thank you.
With us as partners.
Thank you. Would any of the panelists like to respond? Jibril?
Yeah, I'll follow up with that. To just kind of share a little bit about what I see, like I mentioned before, I try to study interventions at the high school level. And in terms of the Accuplacer being used as an academic signaling tool to signal to a high school student where your academic placement is, it does a very good job. It is not designed to diagnose what that high school student knows, because it doesn't do an item analysis to tell you exactly. In basic math, it doesn't tell you exactly, well, you know how to do fraction, but my friend, you don't know how to do multiplications or decimals. It doesn't tell you that. It gives you an aggregated placement that signals to you that you have some weaknesses in basic mathematics. In terms of sending that signal, it is a very good instrument. And from what I have seen in terms of intervention, there are 5 kinds of intervention that I look at that high schools use. After they've got the signal, they have the data. And one of those interventions is a very basic. Some high school would say, well, since they're unfamiliar with the test, our form of intervention will be test familiarity. And by using test familiarity, we're going to make sure that the student take the test enough time that they become familiar with how to take the Accuplacer test. They understand the content, they understand how the questions go. So test familiarity is a form of intervention that I have seen, and I'm tracking that one. And I can come back and tell you in a ranking order which one of these seems to be doing some good things and some that are questionable. Embedded curriculum intervention is a very powerful thing where math and ELA teachers will take the signaling Accuplacement results and say, okay, now we can see that the cohort of juniors that we have, based on these Accuplacer results, we can see that there are deficiencies in basic math or maybe in elementary math. You have a sense of where the gaps are. And the teachers, the math and ELA teachers, can get together and do a gap analysis and say, okay, I'm going to integrate in my daily practice, if I'm teaching Algebra 2, some review questions, a question of the day, or some special homework assignments or projects that are designed to help the students review the basic skills that have become dormant. Absolutely powerful form of intervention where the teachers are still teaching the standards of what they're doing. They are integrating and reviewing dormant skills that students did not have as part of their daily practice. Extremely powerful. I have seen another form of intervention where we said, okay, well, we have Play-Doh as a, Play-Doh that we have in the high schools. We are going to use Play-Doh because it's a really good instrument in terms of helping the students go into Play-Doh and go into the modules in Play-Doh that are teaching them about basic math. So they can, not only they learning about on a computerized system, but they also reviewing. And once they complete a Play-Doh exercise, they'll do the open book test and the closed book test and the mastery test. Take those results and track to see if those reviews are helping the students with their improvement of their skills.
So one of the challenges for the Common Core assessments people at Park is to come up with good assessments that will also help indicate to students and their teachers whether they are on track for meeting the expectations of higher education.
Yeah, so the Common Core arriving is very timely because it's really tying together what some of the pieces that were missing in terms of now understanding where students are, what are they missing. We can tell using the Accuplacer or the Accuplacer diagnostic, which gives a little bit more detail. You have a sense of where the gaps are. Do a gap analysis while the students are still in their junior year and use the senior year as a year where you can say, okay, we are going to address your college and career readiness gaps because now we have a sense, we have a signal, and we have some data that we can use to improve how we're going to move you forward.
Ivanna, you have something to
As a student perspective, I believe that I was in the 096 course, and it was because in my senior year, I didn't take math because I wasn't required to, and that was the issue. I forgot everything I learned, 10th, 11th grade, and when I went into the class, I knew everything the teacher was teaching because I took that course, and I, scored, well, not scored, but got a good grade in that class. So for me to retake the course, it was really annoying because I just felt like I knew everything the teacher was talking about, and I asked if I could place out of it because I didn't feel the need to be in that class if I already knew what I was learning. It didn't make sense to me. It was just the fact that my senior year, I wasn't required to take math. So I forgot everything I learned. That's pretty much what it was.
We have a patient questioner in the front here.
Hi, my name is Marcia Kessler, and I'm from the Old Colony Regional Vocational Technical High School in southeastern Mass. And I think I have a point and then a question, which is that we've been equating, my perception was today, college with career readiness. And I would like to think that given the Pathways to Prosperity report and the other documents that we see, that vocational high schools also offer a path to career readiness for a group of students who are not yet ready to go on to college, or who have purposely chosen not to attend college because they wish to be an electrician, and while they'll require further education, it isn't at the higher education level. How do we fit in to both the Park assessments, where we have students that have only 90 days of academics versus 180, and how do we validate in this process the work, the very real and important work of vocational high schools, with an emphasis that's been so strongly on college as the only path in a way to become career ready and successful?
That's actually a great question, and I would like to address your first comment before going on to the question about Park. From MBAE's perspective, we about 5, maybe a little more years ago, adopted the achieve definition, which is that we recognized from the employer experience that everybody is being trained for jobs that don't exist yet. And so everybody has got to have the skills to be a lifelong learner and to adapt throughout their career. So we basically agreed with the achieved definition, that you need the same literacy and math skills when you graduate from high school, regardless of what your post-secondary pursuit is. Whether you're going directly into the workforce, whether you're going on to higher education, to apprenticeship or career training. And we feel very strongly that there should be no, and we feel that the vocational and technical schools, in fact, have met that standard, and that they are, you know, passing, their kids are passing MCAS, and they have a large percentage going on. As a matter of fact, we've urged the academic and traditional high schools to look to vocational schools for a model of introducing work-based learning and experience in the workplace into more academic courses. So while, you know, we think that Pathways to Prosperity has really identified a very important point, that we need plumbers and, you know, we need a lot of different skills, and they don't all require a 4-year degree. We would argue that they do all require the same level of education in high school, regardless of where they're going next. So that's my response to your comment, but I want to give the panel a chance to respond to the second part, which is what about assessing readiness when what we're assessing is readiness for the workplace? And maybe, Dave, you should start.
It's interesting from the corporate perspective. I know in education, testing is always an interesting topic. We have 100 tests of our own that we apply to anyone who comes to our company and wants to work with us. Those aren't necessarily connected to what's happening at the high school level or at the college level. And very often, depending on the job that you're applying for, we're testing for those technical skills. You know, how good are you at understanding how electrons flow across a piece of wire? And so the vocational schools to us make a very substantial contribution. Not everyone will be the chairman and CEO of our company. That doesn't mean there aren't hundreds of thousands of other jobs that need to be filled by extremely competent people. And those people have to have all of those fundamental skills we've discussed, because it's no longer the world where you can just go be an electrician and stand in the back room. You're going to be a technologist who has to interface with customers on a regular basis. We just don't have the depth of staff that we once did, where you could just be a specialist. Everybody has to be able to do a little bit of everything these days. And so from the technical school perspective, very valuable role for us as an employer. But I think, again, that notion of testing and how you look at testing is something that's disconnected between the academic and education world and what we as employers are looking for, which is an interesting point. I hadn't really thought about that prior to this morning.
I've been neglecting this side of the room.
I'd like to comment on that as well. Is it from a college faculty perspective, often my better students are students from technical high schools because they have that other thing. And the thing that my colleagues talk about is habits as opposed to content. You know, the problem is that students don't persist. And there's often the students that have gone to a technical high school. I'm from Worcester. We are very proud of our technical high school. It's actually has a waiting list of people banging on the doors to get in. And part of the reason for that is because they do well in academics, but they have those other skills. The skills that she was talking about going in and asking and being on time and calling when you're not going to come in, which my freshmen don't do. So those are those kinds of skills. I also say that if when I talk to my colleagues who are sometimes kind of snobby about other career paths, is have you read an electrician's manual lately? It's probably more difficult than most of the freshman level texts. This is a different world than we lived in 50 years ago. And the other story that I always tell is this freshmen who write about working for Victoria's Secret. I don't know if any of you have ever had to work for Victoria's Secret, but for years I had freshmen who were working for Victoria's Secret, and apparently Victoria's Secret has a 3-inch binder job manual that you have to know and memorize, and all sorts of details, and they have secret shoppers that will come in and check to make sure that you are following those things in that manual. And they're basically, you just have to come out with a high school diploma to work for Victoria's Secret. It's not easy, and I think that's something that we have to communicate more with our K through 12, is that they'll think, oh, well, I'm just gonna go and do this. No, you're not just going to do anything. There's always education afterwards. There's always sort of expectations afterwards. Several of my English majors in the last couple of years have been hired by banks. and I couldn't figure out why, so I called up one of the employers, and he said, well, because we did our own testing. We do our testing, and frankly, those English majors were the ones that were doing better in the testing than the people that had actually majored in economics. So it was just reading, analytical thinking skills, critical thinking skills that came out on those tests, so.
Ivanna, you had something in.
I don't know if I mentioned this already, but I work at the airport and I work for an airline. The codes, crazy. We have to memorize thousands of codes, thousands of, to check in a passenger to travel. And I had this written down in my notes. I don't know if I mentioned it already, but in order to be not complete, I don't want to say, but in order to have, you need to have skills. And by that means like social skills, like being able to connect with other people, being able to serve other people. And not only, because you can only tell how a student or how a person is by paper, by their writing. That's not how you could tell how a person is, It's how they perform in the real world and socially. So I feel like you have to have a lot of social skills in order to be successful. It's not only academic skills that need to be, noticed. So.
This notion that to be college and career ready are the same thing, to me that raises some of the most interesting and, in a way, profound issues that I think we face as educators in this country. And I think that the Pathways to Prosperity report was very good in putting this issue on the table. In our idealism as Americans, I think, about wanting every young person to have an equal chance to succeed, we have equated that with encouraging, every young person to think about college and wanting to prepare every young person for college. And that, I think, comes from a very positive cultural place about our aspirations for individual, but it does also have the implication, unintentional, I think, of perhaps disparaging alternative pathways for people for whom college isn't really the right answer and isn't really of interest. And I think the Pathways to Prosperity report kind of points out the need we have in this country to think this through in a deeper way and to provide alternative pathways for people with different interests, with different skills, with different potentials, so that people can maximize along different dimensions. So the notion that college and career ready is the same thing in the context of Achieve and ADP, I think, does make sense intellectually because, at least for four-year college, and Bob, it'd be great to hear you on this point, but it does focus on math and English, and it doesn't focus, let's say, on all the things that are present in Math Core, which we say are appropriate to be college ready for a four-year institution. So we've got some work to do to sort out this, I think, issue, and it's not just a curriculum issue, it's a pretty profound, I think, social and cultural issue. But
Right. And Bob Schwartz has been waiting to talk about this.
Yeah,
It's on.
I don't actually, this shouldn't be a pathways discussion, but I actually think, as the former president of Achieve and the co-author of the Pathways report, these two things are not necessarily in conflict. I mean, I agree with Linda's basic point about core academic preparation for all kids that we ought to focus on, but I also obviously believe that we do need, at some point, to acknowledge and build legitimate alternative pathways for kids for whom the four-year institution may not be the right or best path. It's actually on that point I wanted my question, and both to Richard and to Dave, has to do with the importance of putting much more focus on career readiness for kids going on to four-year institutions. We are now seeing, there was a story in the New York Times 2 weeks ago that had to catch people's attention. 45% of young four-year college graduates are either unemployed or working in jobs that do not require a four-year degree. Second fact, Richard, I'm sure, knows a recent study called Academically Adrift. The very things that Dave talks about as being absolutely essential for success at the workplace, analytic reasoning, critical thinking, analytic writing skills, 45% of a national sample of kids in four-year colleges show no evidence of improvement on those skills in the first 2 years. The authors speculate that a lot of the reason for that, and as the title of the book suggests, a lot of kids are wandering into four-year institutions without a clear reason for being there. This to me suggests we need to put much, much more focus on careers, career information, so that kids early in high school, as well as coming into college, have a much clearer sense of why they're going on to study, and understanding the relationship between what the requirements are in a particular career and why they need to get themselves skills and focus on that career. The question back to Richard, you alluded to Northeastern and the experience with the co-op program, and I wonder what your reflections are, having worked in that institution as long as you did and now being responsible for a more general purpose set of four-year institutions. Reflections or comments on that?
Yes, I think that as a general proposition, higher education, particularly at the upper end of the food chain in higher education, has done a terrible job of integrating career preparation and career thoughtfulness into higher education, and indeed has tended historically to disparage that. If you go to one of our top liberal arts colleges or Ivy League institutions, you won't find a lot of interest in the faculty there in helping you think about careers. That is considered sort of a downscale thing to think about. And what happens in higher education, of course, is that attitudes at the top of the food chain tend to filter down and permeate all other institutions. And I think as a result, as an industry, this notion that career preparation is somehow lesser than a liberal education has taken hold in our industry in a way that I think is extremely unfortunate. The thing that is so terrific about a place like Northeastern is it blasts through that dichotomy and says, yes, we want everybody to have a liberal education, and yes, we want everybody to have the richest possible life they can have, but we also want them to be able to connect that with the real world. And of course, the co-op program and internships and are just enormously powerful in that respect. And they have the further effect, by the way, not always appreciated, of increasing the cognitive development of students who go through them, so that the students not only learn 21st century skills through co-ops and internships, but they understand academic disciplines better. They understand what they're studying in the classroom better. So I am passionate on the point of trying to move higher education beyond this destructive dichotomy between liberal education and career preparation, and help students understand that both these things are important for most students, and we have to find a way as educators to integrate them much more fully. This is one of the deepest challenges I think we face, which is why I pointed out in the inclusion of 21st century skills that there lies therein a huge challenge for institutions which fundamentally don't know how to do that and haven't been paying attention to it for a very long period of time.
I just want to add one thought to that, because I think that is absolutely critical from the employer perspective. The pace of today's world in the employment arena outstrips what's happening at the government level and at the academic and education level. We don't have a lot of time to spend deliberating what do we do next. We're in decision mode all the time, and we need to take what we've learned and we need to apply it immediately to try and find a way to be competitive and profitable. And the one observation that I would make in terms of applying those skills in terms of the corporate world is it really is about pace, and it's about how fast can you make that transition from what you've learned academically to how you are going to apply it in my business, my specific business. Not Verizon, not Sprint, but my business and the way I run AT&T that is going to determine whether or not you are going to be successful in your career with my company and then the next company, because you probably won't just work for me. And you're probably going to come out of school, work for me, and then go and work for 7 other people by the time you get through your career in today's world. And building on all of those experiences quickly and thoughtfully is absolutely critical to whether or not you're going to have a successful life in the work world.
You know, I just can't resist saying one other thing on the point of academically adrift, because that's about students going through college. But of course, the other thing widely observed in the culture is how many students are adrift after they graduate, and how many kind of move back home to figure out what they're going to do with their life. And you find parents saying, wait a minute, let me get this straight. I just shelled out, $250,000, whatever it is I shelled out for the student to go to college, and now they're going to come home and figure out what to do with their life. Something didn't happen in college that should have happened in college, and that pattern is far too widespread in our culture.
You must have spoken to my son recently.
We have time for maybe one or two more questions, if anybody has any. Nina, right behind you. Oh.
Thank you, Linda. My name is Isa Zimmerman, and I've been at this work for too long. But several things that have been said. Mr. Mancuso, you said something about kids coming to AT&T who have more technology knowledge that's changing the business. And of course, Commissioner Freeland's talked about the need for greater integration between higher ed and K-12. I think everybody sitting here would agree with what Commissioner Freeland said, but are a little bit more amazed at what you said, because the question I have, having said that, is anything being done to help educator preparation institutions and programs understand the role that technology is now playing in our lives, and as an instructional tool, so that kids who either go to work or go to college come out knowing how to use what everybody in the world now has. I mean, I ride the subways a lot in Boston, and 90% of the people on the subway have something plugged into their ears, or they're talking, or they're punching buttons on their handhelds. And I don't see, I just did a little survey, I don't see the schools, K-12, teaching with those instruments and teaching kids how to be responsible and productive using those instruments. And so I go full circle to, are the teacher education institutions preparing our educators to deal with that issue, to help kids to prepare them for their future?
Anybody want to take that on?
This is just a slightly different twist on that. We as a corporation find that we're learning from our employees as much as they're learning from us. And I think, and this is just a personal perspective, there's so much pressure on school budgets to try and find ways to spend money wisely. In technology, I often hear from schools who want us to fund the latest technology in their school, write us a grant, if you would, to provide smartphones or iPads or whatever it may be. These kids know a lot already because they've already incorporated this technology in their life. So this is just an observation. Maybe there is a way to better integrate the knowledge that those kids already have into the academic environment rather than necessarily putting pressure on the academic environment to teach them.
I want to make a comment about that too. I mean, one of the things we do is we have a foundations program at Framingham State, which covers a lot of sort of skill things. All freshmen are placed into it, and they do a seminar on note-taking, a seminar on critical thinking, et cetera. And one of the things that we do with the faculty members who teach in that program is we talk about who these students are, and we do how they're natives in technology. There's a disparity, I think, though, between the kind of technology they know how to use. What I find with my freshmen is that they can do all sorts of things. They actually teach me. I don't know how to use half the stuff that they know how to use, but they don't know how to use technology in a professional way. So they can Facebook their friends, and they can play Farmville all day long, but they can't send me an attachment. They forget to put a subject in the subject line in an email, and I don't know about you, when you open your email in the morning, I tell them, I'm not opening an email that doesn't have a subject in it. I mean, I have to go through sort of, netiquette rules. They're unaware of, despite what we see on the news almost on a daily basis of people exposing themselves, and I use that word on purpose, on Facebook and other kinds of things, that those things are, that's out there. So there's a line, I think, particularly because of the lack of money to not just purchase something, because by the time a school district purchases something, it's probably outdated. But I think our role in many ways should be about those ethical issues and the professional issues involved in any technology, and making them aware of that, because that's something, you know, as a parent of a 13-year-old and a 16-year-old, I'm amazed that they don't know, that they would think it's fine to do something. I had a student once send me, he thought he sent me his paper, and I saw him on Monday. I said, "You didn't send me your paper. There was a picture." And there's this moment where he just turned pale. And I wasn't trying to call him out on anything. I was just saying, you sent me a picture, it wasn't the paper, what are you gonna do about it? And then he's like, "What did the picture look like?" And I thought he was gonna ask me, you know, "Oh, how do I send it? Am I gonna get marked off?" But his first comment was what the picture looked like. And I thought, what kind of pictures are you sending that you're not worried about the fact that you're failing this class and you really need to send me the paper? So I think those are the kinds of discussions that educators, that parents should be having with their kids about technology, because companies end up paying for that, government or end up paying, taxpayers end up paying for those kinds of mistakes.
A lot of comments to that. I think it seems like one of the issues that we're raising, because you look at all the pieces that need to be in place to really prepare a student for college and or career success, whether it's, let's not forget the parents, let's not forget the community. I mean, the whole host of people and resources and network that brings me to the whole concept of social and cultural capital, which we've talked about. That education is a form of capital that we invest in our future. But if the students who are benefiting, who are the investment in this capital, if they don't have the social capital, the network, the understanding, the support, the infrastructure in place, they don't have the cultural capital of understanding how to navigate in this world they're in. 21st century skills, the list can go on and on. Studies after studies have shown that for particularly urban students, the lack of social and cultural capital is one of the biggest handicaps that they're facing in terms of their success to be ready for college or career. Because if you compare a student from a public urban high school to a student from a private or suburban high school, that student's parents went to college, went to graduate school. They already have a network of people, co-workers, and friends, so that that student is already plugged into a social capital network that already is bridging all of these gaps of what does it mean to be career ready. What is the meaning of my education, and how do I translate my education as a form of capital to advance myself as a human being? A lot of urban students do not know how to make that translation. You're adding to that the lack of cultural capital. If you're a first-generation student, you're not from a culture of people going to college. Even though everybody's championing you and everybody's helping you, they don't have the financial literacy to help you deal with your financial aid paperwork. They don't understand any careers. If you said, "I want to study engineering," they said, "That sounds great. We have no idea what that is. How do we support you so you do not?" I mean, these are issues that I think we need to really, my approach to this whole notion of college and career readiness is that it has to be holistic. We have to look at the whole child. The academic pieces are critical. You have got to have the academic pieces. You have got to have the personal skills and the support services that are going to help you. But you also have to have the career training and knowledge, because I think ultimately we're preparing everybody for a career. Even somebody who's heading to a four-year college, they are working towards a career. The pathways might be different. Someone from a vocational school is heading directly to a more applicable thing, but ultimately, career readiness is what we're working towards, because we are going to college to attain access to a career for life successes. Then I think kind of really re-engage the conversation around career readiness. And what does that mean in relations to college readiness? I think that's something, sort of like something I always like to throw something out there for us to think about, because I think in the end, Everybody's preparing for that wonderful career, whether they're going on to graduate school or whatever it is that they're doing. Ultimately, they are all preparing for a career. And college could be one of the vehicles to get them there.
And thank you, Jibril. You did a great job of summarizing and bringing us to a great conclusion. I want to, first of all, thank all of you for being here today. Thank our panelists who were terrific, and Commissioner Freeland and Commissioner Chester. As you know, and I'm delighted that some of you are back for your third round, this is the third in a series that MBAE and the Rennie Center have sponsored on the impact of the Common Core in Massachusetts. But it actually was about a year ago that we sponsored our first forum to really understand what was in the Common Core. And that was at a time when there was great debate in the Commonwealth, and MBAE had not taken a position on whether to support or oppose adoption. We have used a little bit of technology to videotape all of the forums. They are available on both the Rennie Center and MBAE website, and this one will be available soon as well. So we hope that you will refer to them often. As Bob had thanked our sponsors earlier, this whole series would not have been possible without the support from Fidelity Investments, from Intel, from the Nellie Mae Education Foundation, and from the Evaluation Systems Group of Pearson. And Paula Nassif, the Executive Vice President of Pearson, is with us, and we're delighted to have you. We want feedback from you. We are already thinking about what we will be doing next. Jill Norton, the Executive Director of the Rennie Center, is in the back of the room, and she and I are happy to hear from you electronically, by phone, in person. And what I can say to you is that I think that if nothing else, we've heard today not just about problems to solve, but about opportunities presented to us to really once and for all align K-12 with the expectations of higher ed, to get all of our kids ready for successful careers, for being able to support a family and maintain the thriving economy and society that we have in the Commonwealth. So I thank you all, and before we conclude, I want to give Charlie Tolman, who is here from the Nellie Mae Education Foundation, a chance to say a few words.
Good morning, and thanks, Linda. So just a couple of days ago, Jill offered me the coveted spot of just a few closing remarks, and I'll keep them very brief. We at the foundation are really about stimulating transformative change in public education systems across New England that will really provide high-quality learning experiences for all students to really prepare them for success in college, career, and life. And our support of this series of forums, I think, sits squarely in the middle of that agenda. As I listened today, just a couple of reflections. As a foundation, we think that the Common Core is absolutely necessary, but not sufficient to move the system forward. We think that starting with ELA and math is critical. We'd like to see that push into other content areas. I've been really impressed with this conversation, and we'd love to continue supporting this conversation and get it down to a sort of a different grain size that may involve deeper conversations between faculty at the post-secondary level, employers, faculty at the high school level, students at both the secondary and post-secondary level, admissions officers, et cetera. This conversation was a great start on that, and we'd love to continue supporting deeper conversations. We're also very interested in this next generation of assessments and the promise of those assessments through the work of both PARC and the Smarter Balanced Assessment Consortia to be able to provide some of those diagnostic assessments that can really give better information on how kids are moving through their secondary experience and preparing them for success. And finally, I would just say, you know, we believe it's not enough to rely on the math score and GPA and sort of credit-bearing courses unless those learning experiences are flexible, that really address students' interests, needs, developmental phase, and connect to the real world and their learning styles. So we believe that flexibility needs to be built into the system. And the last point I would say about college, career, and work is that, as we were proud to support the Pathways to Prosperity work from Bob and his colleagues, we think that preparing students for different endpoints built on the same foundation of skills and knowledge is critical. So I want to thank Jill and the Rennie Center for the great work on this, Linda and MBAE, Bob and the board of directors of the Rennie Center and the MBAE board, our panelists, Commissioners Friedland and Chester, and our co-sponsors, Intel, Fidelity, and Pearson. And thanks all of you for coming, and we look forward to the next conversation.
Thank you.